by telling you all that I have really enjoyed reading some of your comments after watching last week's Ed Puzzle videos. I've heard a few of you in the hallway talking about minimum wage, and so I thought that was really cool that this seemed to be a topic that you guys could get into. I also overheard a few of you complaining about how long last week's videos were, so I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit shorter. We are continuing on and wrapping up our theme of economics. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about economics and the Federal Reserve, and that will all culminate with a surprise for next week. Okay, I tried to fake excitement, but if I'm being honest, I didn't know that next week would happen. Legislators in Ohio have debated it and brought up bills considering to cancel it, but you will be taking your end of course exam next week in your lab on Tuesday. And so I, as your government teacher, am meant to have covered everything in our standards up to this point. And once we wrap up this video, we will have. And then just as a heads up, next week, you will be taking an end of course exam on American government. I hope I don't overhear you all complaining about me in the hall next week or this week about the end of course exam, because I promise it wasn't my choice, but it is my job to prepare you. So let's talk about economics. And I'm going to start by posing a question. What is money? By definition, money is simply anything widely accepted in exchange for goods and services. But how do we actually know that $1 is worth $1 or $20 is worth $20? Who sets the value of money? And why did the videos last week talk about the rising costs and how minimum wage should be raised with inflation or with the cost of living? How does all of this happen? What is inflation?
Have you ever heard your grandfather say, "When I was a kid, a burger cost a nickel"? Or seen a vintage sign selling a Corvette for $1,000? Boy, would it have been sweet to live in that time, right? Actually, because of inflation, it would be pretty much the same. Inflation is the overall rise in prices of goods and services in an economy. Here's Claire. Claire heads over to the corner store to buy a pack of gum. That pack of gum costs Claire $1. Fast forward a year and Claire heads to the exact same corner store and buys the exact same pack of gum. This time though, the pack of gum costs Claire $1.02. That 2% rise in the price of the gum is inflation. Inflation causes a rise in prices and also causes the value of your money, known as purchasing power, to decrease. Claire's $1 is worth less today than it did last year. In general, the demand for goods and services in an economy is greater than the supply, causing prices to rise and therefore inflation. Governments can control the inflation rate by adjusting the supply of money in the economy. Developed countries like the US try to keep inflation around 3%.
You can actually go to a website to check out inflation in the United States. I'll link it here, but if you wanted to look it up, if you just go to Google and type in inflation calculator, the very first one that pops up is usinflationcalculator.com. So let's click and check it out. Continuing on with our theme of minimum wage, we talked about how it hadn't been raised since 2009. So in 2009, when the minimum wage was $7.25, and it still is, let's see what that would actually be today in 2021. It would be $8.95. So it has gone up. Making $7.25 in 2009 is the equivalent of making $8.95 in 2021. What do we think? Is that fair? Because based on inflation, the cost of things have also gone up since 2009. And so when you made $7.25 in 2009, you maybe not be able to afford the same things you could afford in 2021. The Federal Reserve System, which you'll also hear being just called the Federal Reserve or the Fed, they are the organization in the United States government that try to control inflation. They try to make sure that inflation, unemployment, and economic growth stays stable.
In 1955, the average price of a movie ticket was 73 cents. Today, it's about $9. This phenomenon is called inflation, the increase in prices of goods and services across an economy over time. It refers to everything you buy, from groceries to doctor's visits to homes. Inflation is among the most powerful forces in the economy and financial markets. Too much or too little can send the economy spiraling. So the inflation rate is a big deal for policymakers, and especially the Fed. This chart shows the inflation rate over the past century. You can see it's become less volatile in recent decades. The Fed's long-stated goal is to keep inflation at about 2%. There's a lot of debate and few certainties when it comes to what causes inflation, but here are some of the bigger theories out there. One is increased demand. Inflation can occur when there's an increase in demand in goods and services all over the economy, from households to businesses to the government. Many factors can drive up demand. Higher incomes, more access to credit, greater government spending, and more.
Think about at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic when states began to lock down, gas prices fell, the price of toilet paper went really high. The reason toilet paper was selling at such a high price while gas prices were lower was due to the law of supply and demand.
What's important to know is that when demand grows faster than supply, businesses can raise their prices. This type of inflation may occur in a growing economy. Supply pressures can also drive inflation. When the cost of doing business goes up, companies need to raise prices to protect their profit margins. Higher wages, higher land costs, and tariffs can all make running a company more expensive and lead to inflation.
And so the Fed, or the Federal Reserve, tried to control the economy and keep it stable by changing the interest rates at which it lends money out to the banks. The Fed is also responsible for how much money is in circulation. A common misconception is, if the government's broke, why don't we just print more money? Well, if you print more money, that money's going to be worth less.
The Fed is a major factor in inflation. It dictates the supply of money in the economy and changes interest rates, which are the cost of borrowing money. By changing interest rates, the Fed can influence how many cars, homes, or machines American households and businesses buy, and that affects whether prices go up a lot or a little.
It's important to note here that, like the Supreme Court, governors of the Fed are appointed and confirmed by the Senate. After that, though, the president cannot touch them. And the reason for this is that we want to ensure that the Fed is doing what's best for the economy and they're not being pressured by the president or any political party.
When the Fed lowers rates, loans become more attractive to consumers. They borrow more to start businesses, buy cars and homes, and spend more on consumer goods, which can drive up demand and increase inflation. On the flip side, the Fed raises rates to limit demand and keep inflation in check. Usually, if inflation starts to pick up, the Fed considers raising interest rates to limit borrowing. The hope is that this could keep the economy from overheating and keep inflation down.
This week's Crash Course actually has two hosts who do a pretty decent job at explaining some of this, so I'm hoping that it'll help you out. In addition to that, I have a Google form with a slideshow with some notes that will hopefully give you a better understanding of our economic system. Because of the end of course exam next week, I'm also attaching some Quizlet and potentially Quizzes review games to Google Classroom to help you to prepare. They are optional, but if you don't intend on sitting down clueless on Tuesday, it might not be a bad idea to just do some review over the content that we've covered all year. I promised you this video would be short to make up for all the time I took from you last week, so that pretty much wraps it up. Just kidding, couldn't end without saying, make it a great week.